At this time, we share remembrances of our brother Juniper. We ask you, if you come up, to share that you be brief, and also that you tell us who you are, some connection, how you've been with us or with Juniper, so we know who we're hearing at this time. I have two tiny stories. Of course, I've lived with Juniper a few years, and there's endless stories. Everybody up in Minnesota had endless stories. So a few years ago, Juniper had a heart attack, and we had to take him to Abbott Northwestern Hospital in Minneapolis. And as he got better, they were wheeling him back to a new room for him for a little more time, and Brother Bob was with him at that time, and he told me this story. He said they were wheeling him in, and these new nurses said, "Well, what should we call you? Are you Mr. Cummings or what?" He said, "Why don't you just call me darling?" Only Juniper, just call me darling. And of course, after that, they fell in love with him.
Just two things that I really will always remember about Juniper was his joy, and just amazed at all the letters he would get. Toward the end, when he couldn't write anymore, I would write his letters for him, and it just seemed like there was always more letters and more letters and more letters, and that was just amazing to me, that he kept in touch with so many people. And he also knew details about people. I'd ask him about this person, who's this person? And he'd give me a history a mile long. He may not have remembered the person if they'd come 5 minutes ago, but he could tell you everything about them. That was something that I always remember about him. Another thing was, I think he was always ready for anything. That just always impressed me. He was always ready. Everything in his life was a blessing. A new person, a person to meet, a person to talk to. He was extremely one of the most positive and faith-filled people I've ever met. So it was a great privilege for me to have lived with him and been able to spend some time with him toward his last years.
Hi, my name is Peggy, and I didn't meet Father Juniper here, but I had the pleasure many times of meeting and being with him at Garnerton Friary in Zambia. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that we have received emails from especially the young people, and they are mourning, and he is counted among their blessings every day and has been prayed for every day since he left Zambia. He made such a difference in the lives of young people, not just with his wisdom, but he would always find a little job which would bring about some money to buy some food for the family. It was just a pleasure to watch him minister, and he was always smiling and would always stand out with the, he would, not only the people, he would worry about the banana grove that never was a success and the piggery that was never a success. And he would just say, well, God has a plan with all of this.
My name is Father David Lenz. Father Juniper knew that I had a great devotion to Padre Pio, and so he would tell me the story that you just recounted about when he met Padre Pio in San Giovanni Rotondo. There he was in the friary there. Padre Pio was a Capuchin Franciscan who had the stigmata. So Juniper somehow got there, and being Juniper, I'm sure he found a way to get into that friary and to the chapel. Padre Pio was known to walk through the hallway before Mass and greet people. Well, anyway, Juniper tells me the story that he had to use the bathroom, and he sees Padre Pio, and he goes up to him. Now, Juniper would have been dressed in the habit, as he is now, conventional habit. Now, Padre Pio was a Capuchin Franciscan. So, Juniper says to Padre Pio, where is the bathroom? I need to use the bathroom. Where's the bathroom? Padre Pio put his arm around Juniper and says, you come all this way to see Padre Pio, and what do you ask him? "Where's the bathroom?" I just have this image. I guess I had it this morning, or once I heard that Father Juniper had passed, that when he passed on, and I have no doubt that he went to heaven, that Padre Pio would have been there and would have put his arm around him and said, "Oh, you come all this way, but we're not going to the bathroom." And Juniper, you know the sense of humor he had, just unbelievable. And I'm sure he would have had something to say, though, to Padre Pio at the gate of heaven. Padre Pio used to say, "I will stay at the gate of heaven until all my spiritual children come into heaven." Well, that's why this image is so real to me, that the two of them are enjoying the beatific vision now.
Good evening. I'm Jim Kemp, one of the friars, and as Peggy noted, Juniper is known around the world, and I'm going to have a chance to say something about Juniper tomorrow, but I want to share some of the emails that I've received from friars in Zambia and here in the United States. Two of them from young friars, and one in Zambia from a not-so-young friar. The first, I received the message of Father Juniper Cummings with a heavy heart. He lived his vocation with passion and gave us a true example of what it is to be a priest and to be a religious. He was a true son of St. Francis. And that's from Friar Casito, who's been here a number of times. Also, I received the message of the death of our brother, Friar Juniper, with deep sorrow. Juniper was a parent and a mentor, a friend of every person, especially the poor. I will miss him always. My condolences, Friar Kennedy. And then from the not-so-young friar, I write about the lifelong love and respect and friendship I shared with Juniper. I saw him in December and had the feeling I would not meet him again in this world. He was my first guardian after the novitiate, and then our provincial, and then the good years we spent together here in Zambia. He challenged me to be what I am today, and we enjoyed challenging moments that we spent together. I loved him and celebrate his role in my life and ministry. May the Lord welcome him with a warm hug as he enters his kingdom. Brother Tony Droll. And finally, a story from a friar here in the States, from Father Alex Zimmerman, who's the senior friar in residence at the novitiate in Rio Grande, California. He writes how he met Juniper first in the 1960s through the IPC, the Inter-Province Conference, which talked about Franciscan topics, kind of a symposium. But he goes on and says, in the early 1980s, there was a meeting of the interjurisdictional Franciscan provincials in California. Not all the provincials wanted to attend, so they invited vicar provincials, which Alex was at the time of St. Anthony Province, and he says, that's how I got there. One day we had free time and the conventuals planned to meet for dinner. During the afternoon, however, there was a mild earthquake. I thought someone was vacuuming in the room above me, noisy and a little shaky. Later we told it was indeed an earthquake, and Juniper told us that night he was sitting on the toilet when he heard the rumble. And he knew exactly what it was. And he described in some detail how his death and disappearance into the Pacific Ocean via the local toilet system during an earthquake would appear in the province necrology. As St. Francis often said, "Oh, but for a forest full of junipers." Rest in peace, Friar Alex. Juniper's early life was really involved in teaching. He took that theological background he had. Bob Showers just did our second reading. He studied at Fribourg, as Bob and Martin Day had, and I suppose others. And he taught. He taught in St. Louis. He taught in Cary. He taught at various Catholic universities in the Louisville area, and he taught in Rome. But his first assignment teaching was in Chaska. And I understood, Father Simon Sauer told me the other day, he says, you know, Juniper taught me dogma. He taught me about the Holy Trinity. He taught me about the Eucharist. He was a great teacher, very animated. He did say he got very scattered when he wrote on the blackboard. He tended to be all over the place, which is also very much like Juniper. And apart from teaching, Juniper is also a formator to our young students, the seminarians. And And I was just visiting up in Angola, and Father Joe Keeney told me a story. He says, yeah, Juniper, he taught me in school and taught me a number of things, but the lesson I remember most was really a formational moment. He said, one hot, sweltering day, I was in my room in Chaska, and for some reason, I had a room that had a private bathroom. And he said, Juniper came in sweating, sat down, and says, oh my gosh, it's hot. It's so awful. What I'd give to have a cold beer. And they talked some more, and he kept saying, it's hot. I wish I could have a cold beer. Well, unbeknownst to Juniper, Joe had a contraband case of beer in his closet. And he finally said to Juniper, you really want a cold beer? And he said, I do. And he says, okay, go in and flush the toilet. Juniper's like, what? Well, he goes to the bathroom, flushes the toilet. He says, wait a minute. He says, okay, now open the lid of the reservoir and pull out your cold beer. That was his refrigerator. And you know what? Juniper didn't ask where the beer came from. If there were other beers, he enjoyed that beer and left it. Joe says he learned a lot from that. You know, that's another way of teaching. And while he was at Chaska, he began giving retreats, which was really precursor for later developing the Franciscan Retreat Center at Prior Lake. And he ended up giving retreats all around the globe. I mean, in North America, Asia, Africa, Europe. He led parish missions, he led pilgrimages. He took that theological background as a teacher, but made it very accessible to everybody. That was Juniper. Now, Paul goes on to say here in his farewell to these Christian communities that they also needed to help the weak, to help the poor, to help those on the margins, to help those in need. And we all know that was very much Juniper's life. I'm just going to share two accounts of that. There's somebody that's become friends with Juniper over the last 12 years, Sandy Bedore. And Sandy's parents have known Juniper for 60 years or more. Grew up in Minnesota. But Sandy went to Zambia and got to know Juniper in his last years there, and was talking about doing some training for the friars and sisters and lay people and churches and all. And Juniper probably said, Sandy, why don't you bring them to the United States and give them some training there? And I didn't know it was Juniper's idea to do that. And Sandy got granted, ended up bringing friars, sisters, and lay people here, and they did leadership training, team building, learned things about development, so that they could take some of these ideas and take them back to Zambia and let them apply that to their life and their circumstances. And so Sandy became good friends with Juniper, and anytime she came to visit her parents in Minnesota, she made sure she took Juniper out. And he said the biggest occasion was, she said, well, her parents really ruled over the family. The heart of the family was their special needs brother, Billy. And on Billy's 50th birthday, she took Juniper to that party for that grand blowout. And she said, you know, in recent years I'd come to visit Juniper, and he had some dementia issues and some memory loss, and a lot of times he couldn't quite remember who I was. Now that's really amazing for those of you who know who Sandy, because Sandy has an oversized personality, and not to remember who she was is something. She said though, even though he didn't always remember who I was, he always remembered who Billy was. Why was that? You know, it's just where Juniper's heart was. And I know many of us know the story. Juniper, you know, as Paul calls us to be overseers of the church, you know, Juniper had his time in leadership. He served as assistant general 50 years ago. 1980s, he served as provincial of our province, and then soon after that became the custos of the custody in Zambia. And served well as that overseer. But when he went to Zambia, you know, he gets this call. He'd been minister provincial. He goes to St. Anthony in Louisville, kind of one of his dream assignments. We all have those. He's basking in that. He gets a call in the middle of the night at 65 years old to come to Zambia and be the custos, to come into leadership there. Now imagine that. 65, you're middle of the night, somebody wakes you up on a phone call, and wouldn't it be easy to say, well, you know, if you would have asked me 20 years ago, maybe. Yeah, maybe even 10 years ago, but now I'm 65. People retire when they're 65. But what's he do? He ponders it, and he says, yes. And off he goes to a whole new adventure. But you know, he told me once he really romanticized what the missions in Zambia are like. He heard all those stories in the 50s and 60s of our missionaries. But when he went in 1989 back to Zambia, what he found was a whole different reality. It was a country, and the whole sub-Saharan part of the continent of Africa was ravaged with AIDS and HIV. And part of his reality was dealing with the dying. and giving Christian burial to the dead, and helping to tend to orphans who had lost both parents to AIDS. You know, he says, but that's where the Spirit led me, and that's what you do. You minister to what's in front of you, tending to the weak, to the poor, to the marginalized. Of course, we also know Juniper had a great devotion to St. Anthony. One time he was editor of the St. Anthony newsletter and was in our development office and cultivated relationships with people across the United States, and often traveled and would call people and go visit them. And I think that's why he was so dearly loved. He just connected with people, you know, and found maybe the weakness in all of us and helped to lift that up, to raise that up. I'm told that Juniper was very close to his mother. And so it's no surprise then that Juniper had a great devotion to the Blessed Mother. You know, at one time he was the rector and guardian and pastor of the Shrine of Our Lady of Consolation in Cary, Ohio, where he could bring that healing of the Blessed Mother to people. You know, the healing of Christ through the Blessed Mother to people in great need. When we were preparing for this funeral liturgy, Eddie Bauer, over here manning our camera, Director of Communications, he said the development office wants a little scripture piece for the card they're going to send out. He goes, I was thinking about part of the Magnificat, and I just thought, you know, Juniper, you know, his soul always proclaimed the greatness of the Lord, and he had such a spirit of rejoicing. And I said, what a great idea. So I stole his idea and used that for the gospel today. Because doesn't that go to the heart of who Juniper was and is still for all of us? Someone who allowed the greatness of the Lord to be proclaimed, that he rejoiced in God his Savior, and he brought the joy of the gospel to others. That's where the Spirit led him, and I think that's where the Spirit leads us today, as Luke writes in Acts and gives us an account of Paul who was on his way back to Jerusalem, and Juniper who has gone home to the New Jerusalem. So let us today allow that Spirit to guide us, to help us keep watch over ourselves and the whole flock, to help us be overseers, to build up the kingdom through the power of the Spirit, and to do it with joy, the joy of the gospel, the joy of Juniper.
Father Juniper 50 years ago was the Assistant General Father in the world, and Father Jim Wainwright, the current Assistant General, I came in from Rome to do those of us letters and have a few words with them.
I'm stationed over in Rome, and two of our friars there asked me to read these letters to you as letters of consolation. The first one comes from Friar Tadeusz. He's the Assistant General for Africa. I was very saddened by the news that Friar Juniper died recently. I know words cannot really help right now, but please know how very much I do care and feel for you in your loss. Friar Juniper was such a caring and talented person, and he truly touched the lives of so many people, especially during his time of service as a missionary to the church and our mission in Zambia. I and all the Zambian friars in Africa will never forget his fraternal and joyful spirit with which he always treated others, really as a brother. His contribution to the development of Zambia's mission is tremendous. And the second letter comes from our Minister General, Marco Tasca. May the Lord grant you his peace. I am writing this letter to extend my condolences to the friars of Our Lady of Consolation Province, as well as the family and friends of our beloved Friar Juniper Cummings. We can rightly say that Juniper was called by Sister Death in the fullness of years. Yet with Juniper, that phrase certainly has a double meaning. He was 92 years old when he left us here on earth, but the fullness of his years was also due to the incredibly busy life that he lived in the service of the Lord and his sisters and brothers. He might be the only friar in the order who could have claimed to have been assistant general, a provincial, a custos, a rector of a seminary, a rector of a shrine, etc. Sometimes when we hear a list of assignments for a friar which is rather long, we ask ourselves, what was wrong with him that they kept moving him around? With Juniper, the question is, what was right with him that he could serve in so many ways, in so many different responsibilities, and still remain the joyful and generous man that he was? He sought not to hold on to what was, but rather was free enough in spirit to dream projects into their future, as is evidenced by his guidance in moving the post-novitiate formation from Chaska to St. Louis and the work he did in Zambia. He served the missions for some time as the director of the Franciscan Mission Association. Then, at a time of his life when most people are thinking of retirement, he assumed the responsibility of being the custos of St. Francis Custody in Zambia. He helped guide that jurisdiction to union with the Lusaka General Custody to form the province of Zambia. But even more significant, he not only served the friars and people of Zambia, he fell in love with them. Friar Juniper and all of you are in our prayers these days. May we learn from his joyful, spirit-filled example, so that whether we are young in age or have arrived at the fullness of years, we might always ask the question that guided Friar Juniper's life and ministry: how can I serve more God's people and better? May the Lord grant you his peace. Friar Marco Tosca, Minister General.